The nomadic people perceive the world differently. Well, how can one possibly not be amazed at the construction of a yurt, which can be disassembled in an instant and then assembled just as quickly? Of course, it is difficult to determine who invented this amazing accommodation, but whoever he was certainly a genius. House in general is a very important category in the Kazakhs' worldview. It's important that whenever people get married and a new family is formed, the expression a yurt is erected is used. The youngest son is considered the heir, who receives nothing more than the top of the yurt, shangarak, meaning that he will become the owner of the yurt after his father will pass away. Thoughts about home and my homeland arose when I first began to read Saken Zhunusov's House in the Steppe novel. I was intrigued by the title itself. Why is it called The House in the Steppe? Does this mean that the people living in it are isolated from society, or could they not become part of society, and therefore the house is located on the outskirts? These endless questions only intensify the interest in the novel. Ainur Toleo, poet and a literary critic, Master of Humanities and Literature Studies, laureate of the Beimbet Mylan Special Prize, winner of the Republican Poetry Competition dedicated to the 175th birth anniversary of Abay. In the literature, in order to determine the time and place of action, we tend to pay attention to the interior. The location described in the novel is a deserted steppe, so in order to determine the period, one has to take a closer look at the description of the house. The writer was only 30 years old when he created this work, in which he raised a very serious topic. This is why his writing is so highly appreciated in Kazakh literature. Saken Zhunusov is a writer and playwright. He was born in February 1934 in the village of Kishkinikol, Walykhanov district, North Kazakhstan region. His fellow writers called him Saken Sera. He wrote about 100 scientific articles on theater and literature, and he also left his mark in the field of literary translation. Thanks to him, the works of Leo Tolstoy, Ales Gonchar, and Stefan Zweig were published in Kazakh language. Saken Zhunusov's plays Crossword, Khosanar, Ar Idung Irkesi, Sabalakh Ablay, and Saukele are being performed in the country's theaters. The writer was very skillful in his approach to literary conflicts, where he would outline the inner and outer worlds of the characters, putting the right words into their mouths and managing to brilliantly reveal the characters' personalities. It's noteworthy that he was the author who had always been in search of a certain literary form that would appeal to the reader. He would often change time and space in his works. The novel begins with a story about the famine in the Kazakh steppes, and suddenly the reader is transported to the era of the development of virgin lands. When you read further, you become witnesses of the confrontation between the Red and White armies during the National Liberation Movement. The plot of the novel is combined so skillfully that it's impossible to get lost in those events. By the way, in his House in the Steppe novel, the author built the plot around the story of the old man, Kurgere. The House in the Steppe novel describes the life of the people in the era of the development of the virgin lands in Kazakhstan. From 1954 to 1960, a large-scale development of virgin lands took place in the USSR. The number of the Kazakh population, which was significantly reduced due to the famine and the war, suddenly increased by 2 million at the expense of visitors. And people were forced to coexist with other people with different lifestyles and customs, who had to not only develop virgin lands, but also to go through the process of adaptation to each other. Contradictions and conflict situations between people of that era formed the basis of the House in the Steppe book. Now let's talk about the protagonist of the novel, Rayhan. For the purposes of developing the virgin lands, people like Rayhan were essential, those who were fluent in 2 languages. She's a skilled engineer, and therefore she was supposed to be a leader, but not everyone accepted this fact with enthusiasm. Opposing her is Qarasai, a character who is firmly convinced that a woman cannot be a good leader and nothing good can come out of it. The personality of this antagonist is revealed perfectly in the novel. Qarasai is a character who cannot adapt to a new life. His eldest son, Jalel, froze to death while grazing cattle. Jalel's wife, Agbope, remained widowed with 2 children in her care. Qarasai wanted to marry her off to his youngest son, Khalil, in accordance with the Kazakh custom Amengerism. His dream is to keep the family close in the house, standing alone in the steppe. Children and grandchildren like himself dream of raising livestock and increasing herds of horses. But there are fewer and fewer pastures for grazing. The steppes are plowed up with a plow. The sharp teeth of the iron plow did not just touch the Kazakh land. The outlook of the Kazakhs, who could not imagine life without cattle breeding, was also plowed up and turned upside down. Such is the skill of a classic writer who made it impossible to hate the novel's characters. It's even possible to sympathize with Karzai, who always obstructs Rayhan and does not approve of the actions of a woman innovator, believing that only his worldview, which is characteristic of his Asian ancestors, is true. All the characters in the novel are people who have to adapt to living in new conditions. Rayhan, driver Osman, Kurgirey, and Dika were able to adapt to the new life, but some did not, and this is where the conflict of old and new looks really prominent. During the years of the development of virgin lands, Kazakhstan took second place in the Union for the production of grain. It became a truly multinational state. Tens of thousands of kilometers of roads were built and too much land was plowed in vain. The soil has been eroded and its fertility has decreased. Pastures declined and livestock production declined. Kazakh writers could not keep being silent about this. For example, the original version of the song Менің Қазақстаным, which is currently the anthem of the Republic of Kazakhstan, was written by Jumiken Najmedinov in the era of the Virgin Lands campaign. Also in the poem written by Kenchiluk Mirzabekov, A Gray Mare, or A Year When Virgin Lands Were Developed, a protest against the policy of developing virgin lands is heard. Of course, in the work where the author points out the blunders and mistakes made during the development of virgin lands, much is also hidden between the lines. And this is understandable because it was necessary to protect the work from the censorship of that time. Back then, the policy of developing virgin lands was explained to the population in a completely different way. Therefore, the main characters of the novel continued to plow the land, sow the grain, and build cities under the slogan, "Long live the Soviet man who equalizes the rights of women, who benefited the poor, wiped away the tears of widows, raised orphans, and educated young people." However, the author shows how nature has suffered from this political campaign and temporary slogans through the story of the wolves. It was becoming sunny and the sun was still low when the wolf heard an incomprehensible fractional hum. The she-wolf slept, resting her head on the old male's thigh and drooling in her sleep. However, the unfamiliar sound of approaching danger made her jump up. The rumble approached and soon found itself so close that scent fell from the walls of the den. Some kind of monster, grinding and shaking the ground, was about to grind large stones covering the hole in the den. The enemy did not appear in front of the hole. He crawled by very close and soon, frightening rumble and clang began to subside. When the crash rang out overhead, dust fell into the hole. The cubs rushed to the hole, but the male wolf managed to grab one in his teeth and escape from under the very nose of the monster. Behind him, also with a cub in his teeth, the she-wolf rushed. The fate of the wolves in this novel is an analogy to the fate of the Kazakhs. Let's say, a lonely house in the steppe is Karzai's house. The wolf's den was also the only one in the area. The wolf's pit was leveled to the ground by the iron fangs of the tractors that came here to develop the virgin lands. The wolf and the she-wolf were able to save only 2 cubs. Karzai also has 2 sons, Khalil and Jalil. The other 4 were caught by people. Wolf parents were glad that they were able to save their cubs. But the wolf has always been the master of the steppe, its very own child. Those who came to plow this land didn't even think about the fact that they were destroying this den, taking away the cubs from their mother. Thus, the author drew a psychological parallel between the fate of the wolf and the fate of the Kazakh people. Elements of artistry prevail in Saken's drama. This is a reflection of his personal qualities and his nature. the nature of a writer who is full of pure drama. He's one of those individuals who, due to the presence of this innate talent, could not avoid the paper ailment, and even if he did not pick up a pen, it's clear that in any case he would become either an artist, or a director, or a singer. Ашырбек Сығай, literary critic.
Әрине, тың игерудің зиянымен қатар пайдасы да болды.
Of course, apart from the harm caused, the development of virgin lands also brought certain benefits. The writer took this into account. Collective and state farms multiplied like mushrooms after rain, in orderly rows, like sparrows on wires. Many new houses were erected in the steppe. People cannot possibly live in isolation, and people like Karzai, living in solitude in the middle of the steppe, had to adapt to collective work. People like Kosimanov, confident lawbreakers who used to oppress the weak, began to look at things from a different perspective. The writer also emphasized that educated and well-versed people like Rayhan Sultanova were achieving success in their careers, and it didn't matter at what cost their slogans were implemented. Karzai was caught and imprisoned for stealing an entire truck of collective farm grain. Why did he do it? Because the very concept of collectivism is alien to him. He doesn't understand at all what it means to work together and achieve common goals. A few years later, when he's released and returned to his homeland, he saw a changed world. Karzai is an introvert, has a different personality, is like a lone wolf. For example, us, working people, we really enjoy planting trees together. We're pleased to be engaged in landscaping. And Karzai, released from prison, thinks.
Көгалдандырып жатыр деп те ойлармыз. Ал қамаудан шыққан Қарасай былай ойлайды.
Things have changed beyond recognition in just a few years. Even in the dry, bare steppe, trees were planted, and the endless steppe seems to be chained and tamed. Have you noticed that he thinks that new people have tamed the steppe, deprived it of its will, subjugated it? Karzai is convinced that a person should obey the earth and not vice versa. He fought for almost half a century and did his best to preserve the traditions of the aristocratic ancestors. Bigotry was defeated. Not even debris left from the lonely house in the steppe. Thank God there are a lot of writers among Kazakhs now, but such writers as Saken, who write clearly and convincingly, there are very few of them. He brought his own special sounding to literature. Dihan Kamzabekula, Doctor of Philology. Now we're doing everything in our power to stay in sync with globalization. However, there are those among us who adhere to the old traditions and don't want to part with the old-fashioned lifestyle. Meaning that the problem that was raised in the house in the steppe novel is still relevant today. That's why readers like it so much. I would even call this novel a kind of marker that defines the old and new worldview. Not everything old is useless, as it contains wisdom accumulated over the centuries. The new things cannot be denied either. They are designed to simplify people's lives as much as possible. But the old and the new must come to a compromise in the name of common interests. This is vital for maintaining a balance between humanity and nature. And this was the exact problem that Saken Zhunusov raised in his novel. Zhunusov experienced considerable pressure from the Soviet authorities for voicing problematic issues. The writer and his works were constantly proofread, and the novel that we discussed today was also heavily criticized. Personally, I find it very important that Saken Zhunusov is a writer who made a great contribution to the development of Kazakh literature. His works, including Akhan Siri, Namanai and Zamanai, are undoubtedly a storehouse of wise thoughts, freely available for readers.